The Ndlovu mansion glittered that Sunday evening, the chandeliers casting golden light over a table that looked like it belonged in a palace. Laughter floated around the room, wine poured smoothly into crystal glasses, and the family looked picture-perfect, just as they always tried to appear. Mr. Ndlovu sat at the head of the table, proud and calm, his children and wife lined neatly around him. For a moment, it seemed like the family was everything people imagined them to be, wealthy, united, untouchable. But then, with a casual smile, he leaned toward his eldest son, Saipho, and asked if the allowance he had been giving him every month was enough. The words seemed harmless, almost playful, but they landed like a hammer. The laughter died instantly. Forks paused mid-air. Saipho looked stunned, his brow furrowed as if he hadn't heard correctly. He set his fork down slowly, his voice low and careful as he asked, "What allowance?" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. His siblings' faces went pale, his younger sister stared hard at her napkin, and his stepmother's hand shook so much her wine glass nearly slipped. Mr. Ndlovu's confident smile faltered, the cracks in his mask beginning to show. In that single moment, the room shifted from celebration to suspicion. The grand dinner that was meant to show the strength of the Ndlovu family was no longer beautiful, it was broken, fragile, and filled with secrets. And Saipho's quiet question had just opened the door to the truth. The moment Saipho asked, "What allowance?" the entire room froze as if time itself had stopped. The laughter that had filled the air just seconds earlier vanished, leaving only the faint clinking of cutlery and the hum of the chandelier. Mr. Ndlovu's proud and easy smile began to fade, his lips tightening as his hand gripped the stem of his wine glass a little too hard. The wine trembled inside, tiny ripples spreading across the surface, betraying the calm image he was so desperate to keep. The atmosphere grew heavy, pressing down on everyone at the table like a weight they could not escape. It felt as if even the lights above had dimmed, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Themba, Saipho's half-brother, shifted uneasily in his chair. He was the one everyone knew as the golden child, the one always arriving in a new car, showing off shiny watches and designer shoes. For the first time, his confidence cracked, and he looked at his father with wide, uncertain eyes, as if begging for an explanation. Across the table, Saipho's younger sister Zanil kept her head down, her fingers twisting her napkin so tightly it almost tore. She didn't dare meet Saipho's gaze. Then Mama Kanyi, the elegant stepmother who always controlled the room with her polished smile, gave a forced laugh. "He must be joking," she said lightly, waving her hand as though Saipho's words meant nothing. But her laugh was too sharp, her voice too high. Everyone at the table knew it. Saipho didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. His eyes stayed locked on his father, eyes filled with questions that had been buried for years. There was no mistake, no misunderstanding, he truly had never received the money everyone else had. And now, sitting at the table surrounded by siblings who had lived in comfort while he struggled alone, the truth burned inside him like fire. The silence was no longer just awkward, it was terrifying. No one wanted to speak first, but everyone knew the family's perfect image had just cracked. Saipho's words had opened a wound that could not be hidden anymore. Every stolen glance, every fidget, every nervous swallow proved the same thing, something was deeply wrong, and the lie that had held the family together for so long was about to collapse. The perfect dinner had turned into a battlefield, and everyone at that table knew it. Mr. Ndlovu cleared his throat and forced a chuckle, trying to smooth over the storm that had just broken. "Of course I've been providing for all my children equally," he said, his voice louder than before, as if volume alone could make it true. He waved his hand casually, pretending the tension was nothing more than a misunderstanding. But it was too late. Saipho's simple question had already ripped through the walls of the family's perfect image, leaving cracks no one could ignore. Saipho sat still, staring at his father, his jaw tightening. Memories rushed back like a flood he could not stop. He remembered standing behind a petrol station counter at midnight, exhausted but desperate to earn enough for rent. He remembered counting coins to buy bread and milk, knowing his daughter was waiting at home. He remembered the shame of borrowing money just to keep her in school while his siblings posted pictures of holidays, cars, and champagne dinners. His chest tightened with anger. How could they all sit here pretending everything was equal, when he had lived like a stranger in his own bloodline? Across the table, Themba leaned back with a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. He didn't need to say anything, the expression said it all. He had always known about the money. He had always enjoyed the benefits. And now, with Saifo's question hanging in the air, the truth glowed in his arrogant smile. Saifo's hands curled into fists under the table. The unfairness was no longer a suspicion, it was a fact written on his brother's face. The so-called allowance had been real, but it had never been for him. It had been a reward for the chosen children, while he was left out, forgotten, treated like an outsider despite carrying the same blood. The longer the silence stretched, the more the room seemed to shift. The chandelier above no longer sparkled the same way, the polished silverware no longer looked as grand. To Saifo, everything around him felt rotten, hollow, like a stage built to impress the world while hiding the truth. The Ndlovu Empire, this dynasty built on wealth, land, and respect, suddenly felt fragile, like it could collapse with the weight of one secret. And in that moment, Saifo realized the truth he had always felt deep inside: the family legacy was never built to include him. It was built to erase him. The room grew hotter with every second as Saifo finally leaned forward, his voice sharp and steady. "Tell me the truth," he demanded. His father's face darkened. Mr. Ndlovu slammed his palm against the table and barked, "Enough. This nonsense ends here." The echo of his anger filled the dining hall, making the servants at the edge of the room lower their eyes in fear. But before Saifo could respond, a quiet rustle came from the far end of the table. His aunt, the elder relative who had sat silently through all the tension, slowly reached into her handbag. Her wrinkled hands shook as she pulled out a folded envelope and slid it across the table toward Saifo. Everyone froze. Saifo's fingers trembled as he picked it up, his heart pounding in his chest. The paper was old, its edges yellowed with time. Carefully, he unfolded it. The handwriting was instantly familiar. It was his late mother's. His eyes blurred as he read the first lines, her voice coming back to him through every word. In the letter, she spoke with love but also with warning. She told him that one day, people in the family would try to deny him what was rightfully his. She warned him that others would prefer he be forgotten, erased, left with nothing. And she begged him to stay strong, to trust that the truth would one day find its way to him. The moment he finished, the room exploded into chaos. Mama Kenyi shot up from her chair, her eyes wide with panic, and tried to snatch the letter from his hands. "That is fake!" Themba shouted, his voice breaking as he pointed across the table. "This is a trick." Mr. Ndlovu's face twisted with rage as he slammed his fist so hard on the table that the crystal glasses rattled and spilled wine across the white cloth. His voice boomed, but the words tumbled out empty, powerless against the paper in Saifo's hand. Saifo clutched the letter tightly to his chest, his breath heavy but his resolve unshaken. For the first time, everything made sense. The years of struggle, the nights of hunger, the feeling of being pushed aside, it had not been bad luck. It had not been coincidence. It had been planned. His suffering had been carefully engineered by the people now staring at him in shock. The truth was no longer hidden in whispers or guesses. It was written in his mother's words, and it had finally come to light. The room was already tense when another voice cut through the chaos. It was Saifo's cousin, a man who had been sitting quietly, almost invisible at the edge of the table. He cleared his throat and spoke with a calmness that carried more weight than all the shouting. "I work in finance," he said, his eyes fixed on Mr. Ndlovu. "And I have seen the accounts. I know where the money has been going." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Every eye turned toward him. He continued slowly, each word dropping like a stone in water. "There have been monthly payments from the company accounts. They were marked as family support. But not a single cent ever went to Sifo. Gasps echoed around the room. Themba shifted in his chair, his smirk gone, his jaw tightening. Zaniel's hands froze over her napkin, her face pale. The truth was out now, undeniable and cruel. While Sifo had been struggling to feed his daughter with bread and tea, his siblings had been swimming in money. Every luxury watch, every shiny car, every designer outfit, they had all been paid for with money that should have been shared with him. Sifo felt his stomach twist with bitterness. He thought about the nights he went to bed hungry so his daughter could eat. He thought about the shame of borrowing money, the exhaustion of working shifts long into the night. And all the while, his father's money had been flowing freely into the pockets of his siblings. His so-called family had lived like royalty, while he had been treated like a stranger, cast aside. The servants at the edge of the room, who had been trained never to react, could no longer hide their feelings. They began whispering among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. They had seen Sifo come by sometimes, humble and quiet, wearing worn-out clothes. Now they realized why. The injustice was too loud to ignore. Themba finally broke the silence, his voice trembling with anger. "This means nothing," he snapped, glaring at the cousin. But his words carried no power. Everyone could see the truth in his face. Sifo looked around the room, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The betrayal burned like fire in his throat, but at the same time, he felt stronger than ever. The lies were no longer hidden. The family's secrets were spilling out one by one, and for the first time, everyone saw just how deep the rot truly went. The shouting and denials circled the table like a storm, but finally Mr. Ndlovu slumped back in his chair, his face pale and his voice low. His hand gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. For the first time that evening, the great patriarch of the Ndlovu family looked cornered. With everyone staring at him, he let out a long, shaky breath and finally spoke the truth. "Sifo is my firstborn," he admitted, his voice breaking. The words hit the room like thunder. Gasps rang out, and Zaniel's napkin slipped from her hand to the floor. But before anyone could recover, his next words cut even deeper. "It was Kanye's idea," he continued, glancing toward his wife. "She told me to cut him out of the main family wealth. She said, he was a reminder of my late wife. She said giving to him would bring tension into this house." All eyes swung toward Kanye. Instead of shame, her lips curled into a satisfied smile. She didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. Her proud smirk said it all. This was her doing, her plan, and she carried no regret. Years of Sifo's pain had been crafted by her cold hands, and she was proud of it. That was the final straw. Sifo's chair screeched loudly against the marble floor as he pushed himself to his feet. The sharp sound echoed through the hall, silencing the whispers. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his voice was strong, steady, unshaken. He looked directly at his father, then at Kanye, then at every sibling who had sat in comfort while he and his daughter suffered. "You tried to erase me," he said, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "You tried to erase my daughter. You wanted us forgotten, invisible, broken. But tonight," he placed a hand firmly on the table, his eyes burning with fire, "the truth is louder than your lies." The table was silent. Even Themba, always quick to argue, sat frozen. The mighty Ndlovu Empire, built on gold, land, and a carefully crafted image of perfection, suddenly looked small, fragile, and ugly. And for the first time, it wasn't Sifo who looked like the outsider, it was the rest of them, exposed in the light of his truth. The room was still buzzing with shouts and whispers when Sifo slowly reached into his jacket. His movements were calm, almost too calm for the chaos around him. Themba was yelling, Kanye was hissing under her breath, and Mr. Ndlovu was rubbing his temples as if the truth had finally broken him. But Sifo stayed steady, his hand gripping the papers he had carried for months, waiting for this very night. He laid them gently on the table, the sound of paper sliding across the polished wood instantly silencing the room. All eyes turned to him. "I've been quiet for too long," Sifo said, his voice low but firm. "While you laughed at me, while you left me to struggle, I did my own searching. I spoke to my mother's lawyer. I looked into every corner of our family business." He tapped the documents with his fingers. "And this is what I found." His father's head lifted slowly, his eyes narrowing as if he already feared the truth. Sifo opened the file and spread the pages across the table. The words were clear, stamped and signed with authority. His late mother, the woman they had all tried to erase from memory, had left behind controlling shares in one of the family's largest companies. Shares that legally belonged to Sifo the moment he turned 25. Gasps broke the silence. Themba's mouth fell open, his usual arrogance drained away as color fled his face. Zanil's eyes widened, tears forming as reality sank in. And Kanyi, always confident, always untouchable, was suddenly trembling. Her hand went to her pearls, clutching them so tightly her knuckles turned white. The smirk she had worn earlier was gone, replaced with raw fear. Even Mr. Ndlovu, the man who had once sat at the head of the table like a king, looked defeated. His shoulders slumped, his eyes dimmed, and he sank deeper into his chair as if the empire he had built was crumbling right there before him. Sifo looked at each of them, the power now firmly in his hands. For years, they had treated him like an outsider, like he was nothing. But the papers in front of them told another story. The empire they claimed as theirs. Legally, much of it already belonged to him. The power they had used to push him down had just been ripped away. The tables had turned, and for the first time in his life, Sifo was no longer the forgotten son, he was the rightful heir. The room was so quiet that even the ticking of the grand clock on the wall felt deafening. Sifo stood tall, the once forgotten son now holding every eye in the room. His siblings, who had mocked him for years, sat frozen in disbelief. Kanyi's lips trembled, her pearls still clutched tightly in her hand, while Themba's proud face had collapsed into pale shock. Even Mr. Ndlovu, the man who had always spoken with authority, could not lift his head. The power had shifted, and they all knew it. Sifo placed the documents firmly on the table, his eyes never leaving his father's. His voice was calm but cut deeper than any shout could. "You asked me if my allowance was enough," he said slowly, his words carrying the weight of years of pain. He leaned closer, his eyes burning with truth. "Now I ask you, was your silence worth losing everything?" No one dared to answer. No one moved. The chandeliers still glowed above them, but the light no longer looked warm or beautiful. It shone coldly on their shame. Sifo straightened, turned, and walked toward the door. His young daughter slipped her small hand into his, and together they stepped out of the mansion without looking back. Behind him, the perfect family sat broken, their empire crumbling in silence. But by sunrise, the silence was gone. Johannesburg buzzed with the news: the forgotten son had risen, the true heir had claimed his place, and the untouchable Ndlovu empire was no longer in their hands. It belonged to Sifo now, and the world would never forget how the truth tore the mighty family apart.